Good morning, and thank you for joining today's web event. My name is Steve, and I'll be your host. Before we get started this morning, I want to review how you can participate in today's web event. You should see an example of your GoToWebinar attendee interface on your screen, and the control panel is where you can interact with us today. During the presentation, you can submit questions to our webinar staff through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click send. During the Q&A session at the end, we'll answer any questions that you do submit. I'm very happy to be joined today by Jeff Carr. Jeff is the CEO of Ultra Consultants, and he will be presenting our first topic in this web series, Preparing for ERP in 2019. For those of you who aren't familiar with Terillium, I'd like to give a brief introduction to us. We are an ERP consulting firm. We specialize in implementing enterprise resource planning projects for our customers. Now, these ERP projects can carry risks if not performed properly, and Terillium is very proud to have won many awards for our ERP implementations. Our mantra is that we're only as good as our last reference. We believe our success stems from our ability to deliver value for our customers, and we recognize all of our consultants for their ability to deliver award-winning services. Terillium specializes in implementing ERP across the United States and has a large team of full-time US-based consultants who do that. We developed the ERP comparison web series to assist companies who are considering new ERP systems. This can be a daunting journey, and we thought this series would be a great way to make the process more successful. Later today, we'll start to take a look at various ERP systems, including NetSuite at 2 p.m. Eastern this afternoon, then continuing with Oracle's ERP Cloud product tomorrow morning at 11. Wednesday, we'll continue the series by comparing the pros and cons of cloud and on-premise ERP in the afternoon. Then on Thursday, we'll see J.D. Edwards at 11 o'clock and wrap up the series with Terillium's president, Dave Woodworth, who will examine ERP project success factors. So to kick this series off, Jeff Carr is now going to lead us through key steps to prepare your organization for ERP in 2019. Jeff is a sought-after expert in the manufacturing and distribution industries, and he has decades of helping thousands of customers select and implement new information systems. So, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today. We're very pleased to have you on the webinar today. And as I pass screen control over to you here, welcome to the webinar, and very interested to hear more about the best ways to prepare our organizations for a new ERP project.
And good morning, and thanks, Steve. Thanks for the introduction, and hello to everybody on the webinar today. I'm going to be talking for about 30 or 40 minutes about ERP systems and ERP implementations, ERP transformation projects. Before I get started, let me talk a little bit about myself and my organization, just give you a little bit of background here. As Steve had indicated, I've been in this industry really a number of decades. I have kind of the unique position that I've been on the software vendor side for many years, and then I also have been on the client side for half of my career. I started out really a long time ago with IBM. I left there and I started a software company way before it was fashionable to do that. Built that into a very successful MRP and ERP software product back in the 1980s. But in the 90s, I decided to move from the software side of the industry to the service side. And then I started Ultra as really with a purpose to be an independent advisor, trusted advisor, an independent trusted advisor to my clients. And so we've been building a pretty good organization over the last 25 years, servicing a lot of different companies focused exclusively on manufacturing and distribution. When you look at Ultra, we're vendor independent. We're focused on manufacturing and distribution. We've got hundreds and thousands of different customers and team members that we've worked with over the years. Now today, I wanted to get us to focus in on a number of things. I work with many different companies. My organizations, my team, we're with dozens of different companies every single year, helping them with a transformation. And that transformation often starts with looking at their business processes, looking at and analyzing the business processes, looking at best practices, what a future state might be, what the business case, what the target of the project really is. So we've worked with a lot of people in that particular arena, and then from that particular step, they typically go on to a selection project, a technology selection project of what is the best software for their particular system. So I'm going to talk a lot about some of the lessons learned that we've had over the years about that. So we're going to talk about how to get started with the ERP search. What are some of the key considerations when you are looking at software? What is the value to your business? One of the things that I want to point out to you today is that there's a lot of advanced functionality that's been grown into these suites of applications, and I want you to look at it from a terminology point of view and also from a breadth and scope. And then we're going to talk about how to approach the project, and then some, just some key tips. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the ERP search itself and the selection process and how you get started with this. I'd like to get you to think about the project genesis. How did these projects really get started? And then what are your expectations? And I also want to touch on the CEO. Where does the CEO fit in this project? And the value. What kind of value should you be considering? And something I'm going to call the project charter, which I think is something, if you're going to be doing this project, you need to have a project charter. And then the organization chart itself. So we'll cover these topics. So let's talk a little bit about how you got started with this particular project. And I think some of this I'd like to have, if you're going to do this project, you need to be thinking about and documenting, why are you doing this? What was the impetus? When I talk to companies, I see a lot of different reasons as to why they're doing this. Usually we get a call after they've been thinking about this, but they see it's a pretty daunting task and they want some advice. So I always ask, well, how did you get started? What was the impetus? Why are you doing this? Sometimes I see that this is maybe it's a new management team or a new member of the management team that's kind of pushing it at the council. Sometimes it's we're going to be doing acquisitions, and our system is too old to keep on putting into the new acquisitions. Or we've made acquisitions and everybody's got a different system. We've got 5 companies now, and we're all doing things differently. Sometimes it's a competitive reaction. Gee, somebody's jumping ahead of us and our old system won't help us keep up. Sometimes it's because we're growing and our old system is just not keeping up. So there's lots of different reasons. But it is important to understand the impetus, because it does affect how you're going to run this particular project and who's going to be at the core of it. Now, also when you get started, I think there's a couple of things you're going to be considering. What are your expectations? Now, I want to make a statement that a few years ago, we saw that the majority of people that started these projects had inadequate or low expectations or too high expectations. So what are the expectations? Well, there's the time frame itself. How long is it going to take us to do this? I've heard it takes over a year. That's what I've heard from a lot of companies. We want to get it done in 6 months. So you can see that time frame is important. What is the real time frame? And then what's the cost? What's the cost of these systems? We've budgeted $500,000. We're a $100 million company. Well, that's too low. What are the resources that I need in my company? What is the return on investment? What investment will I be able to see on this? I've heard there's disruption to the business. Is that true? Is that going to happen? How do I handle that? How do I mitigate that risk? So expectations are extremely important when you start these projects. When I say that half of the companies that started these projects a few years ago had, at the end of the project, said they didn't make their expectations. Well, was that because the expectations were wrong, or was these projects just too hard? I'm finding that the expectations are wrong. So my advice is you really need to spend some time understanding what's happened in the marketplace. What are other people encounter? I mean, there's hundreds of these companies, hundreds of companies going live on new systems every year. We estimate there in the United States there's anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 new what I'll call ERP conversions. In other words, they're trading out an older legacy system to a modern information system. So there's a lot of people that are doing it. So my advice is you need to learn from that. We've learned a great deal, obviously, in our work that we're doing with companies in the industry. So another point that I made earlier is the CEO. Where does he fit in this? His job really is to help you, excuse me, set the priorities and provide the resources. So what's the role for him? I find that often the CEO is not nearly as involved as he should be. And I think this is because he doesn't understand what his role really should be sometimes with a project such as this. Often the CFO or IT director kind of takes the lead and is driving these particular projects. But if you don't have the right CEO involvement, then you're not going to fail. Then you're going to fail if you don't have that CEO involved in understanding what's happening and making sure that things are getting done. Now, in addition to that, we need to talk about value with the CEO, and we need to understand what value means for the company. I find that the value is more than just justification. To me, the value of the project is the goalpost for the project. It's the goal line. It's not just going live with new software. It's the justification. It's the improvement of the business as a result of the new system. So for that reason, I think, I want to continue to emphasize that CEO involvement and value definition are very important. And we're going to talk a little bit about value in a few minutes. I mentioned earlier the project charter. This is a very important part of a project. And this gets everybody on the same page to understand where you're going with a project such as this. So the project charter really spells out the purpose of the project. Again, that goes back to why are you doing this? What is your purpose? What is your mission? It defines the scope of the project. And if you're a multi-facility company, that's how do you deal with that scope and all the different facilities? What are the resources that are needed? These should be a business-driven project, not an IT-driven project. So what are the business resources that you need? And then what are the roles and responsibilities of the people that are going to be on the project, that are going to be on the team? And put a stake in the ground as to what is your time frame and what are your costs. Sometimes that time frame at this stage should be a little bit loose because you don't know enough to really set a firm time frame. It's like peeling an onion. You're not going to get to the real truth or to the bottom of it until you really get further down the road. And the same with cost. You'll find that the vendors are very happy to provide you with cost information, so you need to look at that. I would tell you that there is a lot of variation in cost from vendor to vendor, primarily because there is a bit of a negotiation that can go on at the end. But you need to understand what those costs are, not just your software costs, but your ongoing maintenance costs or subscription costs, and your implementation costs, which actually is the largest part of the equation. And then also, what are your internal costs? So you should be looking at all of that as the cost compared to what the return on investment is. What's that improvement? Now, I will say that when I'm looking at the improvement or the value, I will say that a lot of companies say to me, well, we've already justified it because the system is too old and we have to replace it, so we don't have to do an ROI. And I say, that's fine, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get some return on this. What is it? Because that's the goal line. You need to define the goal line for the project. Now let me move to another topic, the organization chart. The organization chart consists of a number of different functions. SC stands for steering committee. Sponsor is the executive sponsor of the project. Could be the CEO, could be the CFO, could be an operations person. PMO stands for Program Management Office. I'll explain that in a minute. Then you need a project manager or managers, process owners, subject matter experts, users, functional versus cross-functional, and resources. Let me talk about the process owners for a minute. This is a very critical role in a project when you're doing a transformation. You need to have representatives from the business. They need to be your best and brightest in your functional areas. For instance, you need somebody to drive supply chain. You need somebody to drive accounting, finance. You need somebody to drive manufacturing. You need somebody to drive customer service, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever the functional parts of the system are that you're going to be implementing, you're going to need to bring in a process owner. I call them a business process owner because I want that person to own the success of that and the improvement of those business processes. They're going to be supported by subject matter experts and the rest of the business users. You're going to find in a project, you're going to come up with some cross-functional teams where you're going to take some of the process owners and put them together in a team in order to do a string of business process testing and implementation. Here's an example of a typical organization chart where we've got a steering committee. I highly recommend the CEO as a member of that. You got the project executive sponsor that's part of that committee that really sets the agenda for that committee. That committee should be meeting every 3 to 4 weeks throughout the project. Then you've got something that I call a PMO or a project management office. This could be just a a box of one person, or it could be a box of 3 or 4 managers. Each of them have a responsibility for a project that's part of the whole. And then you have reporting up to that team. You've got the business process owners, the IT team, and you got to have a data team. Now, some of the business process owners may be members of the data team, or maybe you have separate people. Data is of critical importance. People, time and time again, don't spend nearly enough time in that area. And then, of course, we need support, subject matter experts. The IT team is going to have to provide the technical team, et cetera. A lot of people often want to know what's the resources that are required for this. Now, this is a pretty comprehensive chart here, and I apologize for it. But what I try to do is I try to build out what it looks like. And this is purely an example. Across the top, we've got the phases. Business process improvement is really where you study your current state and you define your requirements and your future state in your business case. Select is where we're actually evaluating the technology. Plan, configure, build, and deploy are the implementation phases that you're going to go through. So you're going to need a steering committee, a project manager, a process owner, and SMEs. So you see how I've kind of built this out. At the top, I've got the percentage of time that the people have to put in during the project. In other words, your project manager is going to be 100%. Your process owners are going to be 25 to 50%. Your steering committee's got to spend about 10% of their time on this. It's SMEs, et cetera. Then I went to available hours per month, and then I made the multiplication and get to the hours required. Then I put down the head count. How many members of the steering committee, how many project managers, how many process owners, how many SMEs. And then that gave me my total hours. I extended it, totaled it up, and then came up with FTEs. And you could see for this particular project, we have about 7 full-time equivalents for this particular project. So that's a sizable investment on your part. Do you have 7 people available to do this project? Not the actual people themselves, but that amount of resource. Because that's the type of thing that takes. Now, this is a sample project. A large company is going to have more requirements. A smaller company is going to have less requirements. You can do more with a focused team. But I wanted to give you this example so that you could start to build out what your resource needs are. All too often, I find companies going into these projects without having thought this through. And again, that comes back to expectations. Excuse me this morning, but we've got a little head congestion going on. All right, let's talk about the key considerations in software. You see this spider chart, and you see off to the right the vendors A, B, and C, and D. This is a tool that we often use when we're in evaluation. We're looking at 6 factors when we're evaluating vendors. Of course, the number 1 is functional requirements. But you have to look deeper than that. When you're evaluating vendors, you got to know more about them than just the functionality, because there are differences. So to the left, we've got something I call cultural fit. You're going to know what your culture is. You're going to look for a vendor that fits your culture. The solution roadmap. Where is the vendor going with their product? Steve is going to show you 3 products this week. What's the roadmap for those projects? Where will they be in 3 to 5 years? Then the technology. You're going to, as you see different products, you're going to see that there's different technology out there. And then the cost of ownership will vary from company to company. And then at the bottom, a very important one, it almost should be at the top, is the implementation capability of the firm. When you're talking to Trillium, you're going to find out a lot about their consultants and where they've worked and who they are and what they've done in their careers. That's very important to evaluate when you're evaluating different vendors. So let's talk about these considerations for a minute. I talked about technology a little bit. What does that include? Well, the database structure, the technology platform. Do they have a cloud offering? What does their user interface look like? I cannot tell you how many times when I've been involved in evaluations with clients, how the user interface has become very important because that's what they see. Gee, I really like the navigation of this system versus that one. I like this color versus that color. I mean, simple things like that, but it does have an effect on people's opinion. So you need to go through technology presentations as part of the evaluation. The functional fit is, of course, very important. I have found that according to certain industries, there are maybe 10 to 15 specific things that are unique to the industry and to the company within the industry. I find that those are great ways to qualify the vendors. What industry are you in? We focus on the process industry. We focus in on the discrete industry. Within process, we see food and beverage. We see chemical. We see pharma. Within manufacturing, discrete, we see make to order, engineer to order, industrial equipment, industrial parts, medical devices, and various different types of products that are in the discrete area that can either be make to stock, make to order, or engineer to order. But as you look at those different businesses, for instance, aerospace is very different than food and beverage. Aerospace is different than automotive. Automotive is different than building an industrial piece of equipment. And there are functional differences. So when you're looking at the functional fit, you need to identify, well, what are the things that are unique to your industry and to your particular business, and use those as the way to evaluate the vendors. So we have some best practices. We have what we call vendor qualification sessions, initial quotes, detailed demos. We have a whole process we go through to assess that functional fit. It's not easy. It takes a lot of careful evaluation. And then we have the company itself and how many years have they been in business? What's their vendors, what's their experience, what's their leadership in your industry? Do they have a focus group for your industry? If you're in automotive, do they have an automotive focus group? If you're in aerospace, if you're in food and beverage, what's their leadership in your industry? Those are very good questions. You need to visit their headquarters, meet their management team, and get that feel. Again, back to the cultural fit. I always love to have my clients go to user conferences. You learn so much there about the product, where it's going, the users, their gripes, but their happiness. And then last here, I think we call it the support ecosystem. It's their implementation capability. It's the people like Trillium. Who are the people that are going to be on the ground that are help me make it happen? Who are the people that know the product? What's their experience in your industry? What's their years in the business? What is this team going to look like? What's their implementation methodology? What are the steps that we go through? How long do they think it'll take? How many conference room pilots do they have in their project plan, for instance? What's their quality approach? Reference checks, obviously visiting those partners is very important. Let's take a look at value here. So I'm going to talk about it just real quickly here. A couple of key things that I see as value in 2018 and 2019. First of all, is productivity. So I'm going to give you an example. I was working with a company that built toys. They were a toy manufacturer, and they had outsourced everything other than their critical drivers, their critical success drivers, which was their design, their creativity, and their supply chain management, and their sales and marketing. Everything else, manufacturing, distribution, all outsourced. They were running at about $100 million with 100 people. That's pretty darn good productivity. So they were doing about $1 million per employee. They were then going to new system because they wanted to improve that number, that statistic. So they had an older AS400 system, so we were able to come in and help them replace that system with modern technology and dramatically improve productivity. The productivity is inherent in obviously the use of the system and the elimination of waste and redundancy, etc. Second driver is information. That's another key value here. So first one is I'm going to improve the productivity of more people. That's going to drive down into my P&L. I'm going to get more profitability per employee. Second one is information. I'm going to have better information and make better decisions. I can make decisions faster. I can make more correct decisions, which is going to drive profitability. And then the third area is what I call managing assets. I want functionality that's going to help me improve revenue. So I got to drive more sales. It's going to help me drive customer satisfaction. I want to improve the whole customer satisfaction, the whole customer facing process. Supply chain, I want to improve the velocity of my supply chain. I want less inventory. I want it to move faster. Production, I want it to move faster also. I want to be able to schedule properly and be able to meet my deadlines and be able to fully utilize my capacity. And I want to be able to manage my cost. I'm sure there's other ones that might be on your list, but these are the top three. When you look at value of ERP: productivity, information, managing assets. Those are the three that you folks should focus on and define what are the improvements that this new system is going to drive. There's something that we call today core ERP. And I'm going to focus here a little bit on some advanced functionality. But core ERP was built many years ago. Back when I had my first software company, we were building version 1 of ERP, which basically had sales orders, purchase orders, some work orders, inventory, shipments, invoices, accounting, some bills, material, and routing. That's 101 ERP. Everybody has that pretty much today. But those systems lacked in a lot of areas. They were all integrated, but they lacked in access to information, and they lacked in functionality. Today, the systems are much more robust. And you need to be thinking about all of these different pieces and how it all fits in when you're looking at these new systems. So, let's go over here from the left and go around the circle. So e-commerce is becoming very important in many different companies. It used to be B2C, now it's B2B. So the whole e-commerce, the ability to be able to have a shopping cart, to be able to have your products and your promotions on a website. Engineering, product lifecycle management, being able to manage your product ideation all the way through design to deploy. The whole customer-facing process is extremely important. And then we have supply chain itself. We have the forecasting, the demand, then the actual planning of production, the scheduling of production. How do we make sure that we're making our dates, committed dates? What are the committed dates that we can make? And then do we have the inventory and the resources to be able to do that? So supply chain includes all of that, not only just the forecasting, but all the way through production planning and capacity planning. Then we get into something that's has not a lot of people had addressed it until just this last few years, because the advancement of sensors now in everything. I could put sensors in my product that I give to my customer, and I can get data based on how they use it. We call that IoT. But also we can put sensors on the production machines, and we can get, there's now something called lights out manufacturing. And there are companies out there that literally are running with just 10 people watching the plant. And the whole plant using robotics and using sensors and data is really greatly reducing actually what happens on the shop floor, the need for that, because you can get the these systems to do a lot for you. I mentioned IoT. Quality continues to be very important. You need to have integrated quality systems, warehousing systems, to manage those resources out there. If you have a large warehouse, you need for WMS, warehouse management systems. If you have trucks, you need transportation, routing, then of course financials and human resources. All of this is what I call the advanced functionality offerings. And there's more coming out every day. This is not inclusive, but it's amazing how fast these vendors are putting out new capabilities every single year. It's hard to keep up with. Now I want to end here with a couple of slides on what I'm going to call business process maturity in the last few minutes, because I think this is very important as you look at this particular project. Here's an example of a company that looked at their major business processes and measured them up to maturity. So you can see here, and we'll come back to this quickly. Let me define for you these levels over here, 0 through 5. So here are the definitions of 0 through 5. So level 1 tends to be paper-based reporting, a manual approval process. Level 2 tends to be islands of information where processes are not well integrated. Level 3, now we get into people that are using a system well. It's an integrated system. We're eliminating paper. Level 4, information is easy to get to and understand. Business metrics are analyzed and improvements are producing benefits. Level 5, which is the top level where you want to get to, ultimately, users have dashboards to tell them where to focus. Paperless processes have impacted velocity. Information is providing a competitive advantage. And the company's been elevated to the market leader. So information can drive a company in terms of becoming the leader in the industry. But again, think about those different levels. Level 1, kind of ad hoc, paper-based reporting, manual approval process. Level 2, islands of information, processes are not integrated, a lot of waste. But level 3, now I got integrated systems. I'm starting to eliminate paper. So does this make sense? So if you look at this, so thinking about your business processes, quote to cash, procure to pay, design to deploy, hire to retire. Think about those processes. Where are you at today? Again, this evaluation says these were all at a kind of the 1 level, the ad hoc level. Yet where we wanted to go was we wanted to get to 4, we wanted to get to 3, we wanted to get to 3. So that was the process they went through. Now, here's another way of looking at this. This is kind of an application heat map based on those different levels. So in this particular case for this customer, we took all of their different business processes. Again, quote to cash, procure to pay, idea to realize, plan to produce, inspect to scrap. And then we went down into the sub-business processes, quoting, order processing, allocation and pricing, fulfillment, shipment, invoicing, cash receipt. And did the same thing for the other ones. Then we went through and we evaluated them based on that scale. And we found a fair number of them that were still in the ad hoc level in red here. But we found a number of others at the level 2 and a lot in the level 3. But we hadn't really broken through and gotten to level 4 or level 5 yet. So by prioritizing, now we had a way of prioritizing where we wanted to work, what business process improvements we wanted to make. All right, let me finish up here with just a couple of points, and then we'll get into your questions. So how to approach a project successfully. Expectations. We talked about this at the very beginning. Make sure you set the proper expectations with management with the necessary caveats that we're early in the game, that those expectations are going to get more refined. Maybe you start with a range of expectations. This is our best case. This is our worst case. But you need to find those expectations out by talking to people. One recommendation I would have, you're going to be talking with Trillium, find out when their user groups are. Ask them if you can go. Go talk to people. Get their expectations. What were their original expectations and what actually occurred? Another important part of this is managing change and managing risk. I'm going to talk about change management in a few minutes, but projects are all about change. You cannot do them successfully if you do not manage change. These projects have lots and lots of risk. New risks come up every week. You need to be managing risks. Taking responsibility. I've talked to way too many people over the decades that kind of felt they'd hired a software vendor and that vendor was going to take responsibility and make it happen for them. I've run a software company. I've talked to dozens of CEOs of other software companies. I can tell you that that's not the capability that exists. They cannot come in and run your business. You have to take responsibility for the projects such as this. Those people are part of your team. You have to take responsibility for managing them. That requires strong leadership, the executives, and project management. So you got to have the right people in the right seats for these particular projects to be successful. So a couple of final comments and then we'll have Q&A. Get educated. What does that mean? I say get educated by going to user group meetings, but you need best practices education. Far too often I go into companies where we find that the core team knows what they know, which is the current system. They do not understand what the latest best practices are. That's why we include best practices education in our process. But I recommend to you that you think about how can you get best practices education for your business process owners. If you're not going to start this project for 6 months or a year, start now getting educated, finding ways to do that, Apex or other areas, webinars, demonstrations. We do tons of webinars. We have a whole library of webinars on best practices. And so should other consulting organizations if you look to them. Get expertise on your team. Obviously, that's what we do all the time. We are constantly supplemental resources for a project team. Our people have went through dozens and dozens of projects and implementations. So bringing that expertise on your team, either hiring it into people who have gone through it and have actually been business process owners, or going out and hiring consultants that you could bring in for a period of time. And change management. Let me talk just a few seconds on this one. Change management is at the top of the list of importance here. This is all about change. This is all about managing change for your company. This is, as you manage change, you need to understand where is change going to occur. So by comparing your future state to your current state, you'll be able to figure that out, the gaps, the differences. How big is that change? Here's another key question. Who's involved in the change and what is their attitude towards change? Oh, I've been so many times where I've sat in meetings where, we start talking about best practices and somebody said, we can't do it that way. Why not? Because we do it this way. Well, why do you do it that way? Well, because that's the way we've always done it. Well, why? Who designed that approach? Well, Bill in inventory. Where's Bill? Let's get Bill in here. Oh, Bill's gone. But you're still doing it that way, right? Right. And that's the way we do it. And that's the way we want to do it. So that whole argument about change It happens all the time. And you got to get around that. You got to get those people to buy in to the new approach. Because one of the things you don't want to do is you go into these systems, you do not want to start modifying them to your old way. You want to adapt the new best practices. And you need to manage change. So there has to be somebody assigned to managing change who's been through change management before. So that is the conclusion of my presentation. Steve, I ran a few minutes over. Well, I think I did okay. 40 minutes plus your 4 minutes, 45 minutes, pretty much on time. So I'm going to now turn it back to you to see if we have any questions from our field.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. Thank you very much for all of that insight. Some great gems in there. I'll remind everyone that if you do have a question, go ahead and type that into your GoToWebinar question pane, and we'll roll through. We do have several good questions here, and one thing I want to comment on, Jeff, that was I think a great idea, one I haven't seen put to a lot of use on projects, but I think it should be, and that's the concept of the data team within the project structure. We'll hear from Trillium's president in the last session of this series, and one of the things he'll talk about in terms of how do you have a successful ERP project, he'll tell you that data is the toughest part of any ERP project, no matter what system you pick. He calls data the long pole in the tent in terms of your project. So putting together a team to be responsible for data, I think, is a great suggestion from Jeff, and haven't seen a ton of companies do that, but I really think that they should. So consider that if you're thinking about an ERP project. Okay, so a few questions here, Jeff, some good ones. How big a role does the integration with other systems play, or is that a given in today's ERP market that this exists? So is this important, the ability to integrate to other systems?
Oh, the integration to other systems? Just about everybody today that are, popular ERP vendors has got tools to allow you to exit the system and take data with you, or go out and get data and bring it back in. So they all have integration tools. So it's important for you to evaluate that functional capability so that you can have that capability. I haven't seen anybody that is able to put a system in without eventually having something else happen, being brought in from the outside. Maybe it's a department that needs something special, and then the next thing you know, you got to integrate their data into your system. That's how a lot. And remember this. Let's go back. Let's go back maybe 10 years, 15 years, and where we didn't have a lot of integration. But then the ERP vendors started to build more and more function, and there was less and less need for departmental solutions. But when I look at systems today, and that are out there in the world today, a lot of those have been built up as individual islands of information that were departmental initiatives, and they never got integrated. So you don't want to be in that position in 10 years. You buy a new system, there's going to be a departmental initiatives. There's going to be some rogue people out there that, whether in engineering or in warehousing or production, wherever they're at, they're going to come up with some ideas, and they're going to go get some systems. And you don't want to end up where a lot of people are today in 10 years, where you bought a system and then all of a sudden now you got a whole bunch of non-integrated systems. So the ability to be able to integrate whatever you buy to whatever is going to happen in the future is important. The other is, I'll just comment. The other is that sometimes you can't find everything that you want in a system. I had a company that was in the process industry, Microsoft, great system, but didn't have the right kind of tools that they needed in their formulation and their planning, in their ideation that was going on in their labs. So they had to bring in another system, and we had to integrate that. So it happens today.
And I'll echo that, Jeff. Even the most robust ERP systems that are designed to do everything you need, you still find that they need to communicate to outside systems at the very least, you see things like needing to access published information service type systems like rating and routing information for shipping, tax rates for sales tax and use tax. So those systems do need to be fed information. A lot of times that's kind of data service type of information.
Right.
As you mentioned, everything is connected now. Sensors out on the shop floor. Those sensors aren't built inside the ERP system; they're outside systems. So the ability to interact with those sensors and the Internet of Things is certainly a big issue. And then publishing information out to outside reporting systems is also big. So that, yeah, I think this audience member's on the right track here. Another question, Jeff, this is another good one. How important or helpful is having an existing enterprise data warehouse prior to migrating to a new system? Is that an important component to have in place?
That's a great question. Once again, I'll tell you a story. I was down in Mississippi, and I was working with a company that made equipment for restaurants. And there was a new CEO that had been brought in, and he was all about change and making things happen, which is one of the reasons we got hired, is to, improve the information system. And we were going to go out and do the selection. And I was in a meeting with him, and he was with his team, and he was just going on about how lack of information that he had today. And we were a good 12 months away from being able to select and implement a new system. And he just said, I can't wait. I got to have information. So we then said, how about, I call it a BI project, business intelligence. So I said, you've got data. You just can't get at it. You got an old system that doesn't have good reporting tools. So let's go out and let's design a database, a data warehouse, and let's put some tools on top of it and give access to you and everyone else, improved access. And so we went about doing that. It was predominantly a sales system that we put in place, and it took only 90 days to get it up and running. And that CEO was happy as could be. Now he could wait for the ERP solution to come. The other advantage of doing that is that it forces you to work on your data and your data integrity. We had something that we said, sunshine is the best disinfectant. So what does that mean? That means if I can get data into you and you see where the holes are, you start to correct it and fix it. So there's a lot of data issues that come up when you start doing these things. The other is that all of a sudden now you've got all this stuff captured in a data warehouse. You got the history. So when you go live with a new system, you already got the history. And all you have to do is move the pointers from the old legacy system to the new ERP system. So I see tremendous value in doing that. All too often, people don't do that up front. I encourage it. Even while an ERP project is going ahead, let's put some BI tools in. The problem is that if you put it in with some tools today, those might not be the same tools that the vendor provides that you select. So, yeah, sort of a catch-22 in some of that areas, but I say, hey, it's worth the value, and we'll figure that out as we go. So I think it's a great idea.
Great, thank you. Another good question here. What do you see as a typical return on investment for an ERP project?
I always like to see, at the highest level, I like to see 3 to 5 times cost. So I tell people that these systems should cost you 1 to 3% of your annual revenue. So let's say I'm $100 million. I'm going to spend $1 to $3 million on it. To me, that cost is just the initial first-year cost. I've got to add to that eventually my 5 or 10-year cost. I've got to add to that my internal cost. That's just your external cost. And so if I'm going to spend $1 million, I had to be able to see a 3 to 5 times return. That's kind of my typical goal. The return is obviously varies tremendously based on the company. Some people say, well, there is a value to just being able to get rid of that old system, get a new system in. And that's true. There is some value to that. It's typically under the guise of productivity. We're going to improve our productivity and access to information. But as I digger into those and I have more productivity, I have more access to information, I have more functionality to manage those assets, the question should be, okay, here's the future state. Here's the current state. Now we clearly see the improvement. The management has got to step up the line and say, well, here's the value of that improvement. If I can, with all of these productivity improvements, I should be able to do more with less. In other words, my sales should go up, but I should be able to keep my SG&A fairly steady. So I'm getting more profits. When I get into information, I can make better decisions. That should help me manage my supply chain, should help me manage my production, manage my sale for my customers. There's going to be better. I'm going to have a better customer experience. I'm going to keep customers longer. I'm going to be able to and improve my profitability of my customers, on and on and on. So those are the things that got to be talked about in order to build that argument, that case for the improvement in the business, which I think is of vital importance because it's not there to just justify. It's there to set that as the goal line. Let me tell you a story that I tell a lot of customers, and that is that when you get done with the implementation, you're very tired, you're very worn out. Everybody wants to go back to their day job. So the vendor goes home. So the consultants go home, they're done. So, but a month later, okay, we're using a new system. What's new? What's happening? Well, it's pretty much same old, same old. We haven't made many improvements. All we got is a faster system. Yeah, we've got some better data, but we're not using it well enough to make improvements. Yeah, we're got better productivity. It's not. Some people are going back to their old way. So I often advise that you've got to have a phase after the implementation. You've got to have continuous improvement of the use of the system to drive improvements and to drive that. So again, I kind of got a little far afield, but the business case is very important. It's got to be defined. You got to get management involved in it, and it's got to become the goal line and the way you actually drive performance of the business after the implementation is done.
Great, thank you. Okay, last one here, unless someone has another they'd like to type in. We have a strong IT group driving our project. How much should we involve the users?
Well, I would say, first of all, IT should not drive the project. So I think there's a structural issue there that I would say you got to look at. If this project has not been blessed by the CEO and the C team, your C-suite, you got a problem. This cannot be an IT project. We get called into too many situations where the IT tried to implement a new system and it didn't work. You got to have the business driving the project. It starts with the CEO and then his business people and an executive sponsor. Got to drive the project. So in that case where you have an IT driven, you've got to put together that in that org chart, that business process ownership team and that executive sponsor needs to be put in place, and it needs to drive the project, needs to take control of the project.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for all the insight you've provided today. We definitely appreciate you. And thank you to all of the audience members who joined us today. I hope this was a valuable use of your time. And I invite you to join us again today at 2:00 p.m. Eastern as we take a look at the first demonstration of our ERP systems. This one will be NetSuite at 2:00. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody.